After all, we are living in nothing but a simulation, a false world created by a program.
Well, that goes without saying, doesn't it? It's a game after all. It's a developed, curated, and scripted sequence of events that is loosely tied together with a thread that can be called the narrative. When engaging with fiction of any kind, we engage said media by setting aside the initial feeling of dissonance, by putting aside the knowledge that what we're engaging with is not real. We're engaging with a story in a book. It's not real. We're engaging with a story in a movie. It's not real. We're engaging with a story in a game. It's not real. These are the thoughts that usually cross our minds when we engage with any type of fiction. When interacting with media of any kind, we know and understand that the medium in which the story exists and operates acts as a sort of buffer. No matter how immersed or engrossed we get, the knowledge that the story is nothing more than fiction exists in the back of our mind. In other words, to refer to the same analogy from the game, our perception of fiction is akin to the cave dwellers watching the shadows from Plato's allegory of the cave. The Nirvana Initiative, the often lambasted sequel to I, the Somnium Files, discusses and highlights this illusion almost throughout its narrative. We, the cave dwellers, are watching a fiction that makes sure to tell us that it is fictional. In other words, a meta-narrative. This has been the most criticized aspect of the Nirvana Initiative. This dissonance between the narrative and the meta-narrative, a circular loop in which the narrative bolsters the meta-narrative, which conversely feeds into the narrative, thus perpetuating a cyclical form of storytelling. Many people found this dissonance to break immersion, to have undone the emotional heft of the previous installment, and to have, bluntly speaking, wasted their time. However, I find myself fascinated by this story, by this seemingly adversarial relationship between the narrative and the meta-narrative. Especially after experiencing the Ryuki Diverge ending, which gave me a whole new appreciation for what the game's writer, Kotaro Uchikoshi, was going for. In a nutshell, the narrative is both the shadows in the cave and the freed man trying to get the cave dwellers out. The narrative is an illusion. The meta-narrative is a red herring, all in service of communicating a single fact. Immersion is the choice of the observer, not the conceit of the fiction. This video shall go over the unique storytelling of the Nirvana Initiative and how, at least to a certain degree, the game succeeded in communicating its ideas through the narrative, the meta-narrative, and the intentional dissonance between them. I really hope you enjoy. During his investigation, Ryuki, one of the protagonists of the Nirvana Initiative, meets with NICE President Tokiko Shigure. After a terse back and forth, Tokiko begins to espouse on the ideologies he subscribes to. The world they occupy is a simulation. Tokiko exposits that the world, that is to say the game world, is an artificial construct. In simpler terms, Tokiko asserts that the world is not real. Ryuki considers it for a brief moment, but his AI partner Tama is quick to disregard their hypothesis. Later on, Tokiko goes so far as to directly compare their reality to that of a game. She suggests that anomalous occurrences and inconsistencies are akin to the bugs and glitches that a player may encounter in a game. She claims that the existence of such inexplicable events is proof of the simulation theory. Well, isn't this exceptionally meta? A game highlighting the fact that it is indeed a game. Honestly, this is nothing out of the ordinary. Such self-awareness is part and parcel of the postmodern style of storytelling. As such, Uchikoshi isn't doing anything particularly outstanding, and yet I find it something extraordinary. Consider once again the allegory of the cave. The dwellers in the dark are subject to a play where the shadow actors dance upon a stage of light. The dwellers are watching something they perceive to be real, until one of them tells the others the truth, quote-unquote. Despite the revelation, the dwellers choose to remain ignorant, unaware of their ignorance and of the conscious choice made to stay so. Immersion, as I stated earlier, is often an active choice made by the audience. Our perception of fiction, or reality as the case may be, is predicated on our willingness to accept the truth that's laid ostensibly before us. With that in mind, what the Nirvana Initiative does is something oddly unique. The player exists within the narrative as the Frere, which is a distinct character and entity from the actual protagonist. This is evidenced by the fact that Tokiko and the silhouetted characters from the prologue directly ask you, the Frere, to answer certain questions that only you can possibly answer. This is due to the fact that you, the player, aka the Freyr, are aware of certain truths that the characters in the narrative could not be privy to. I don't just refer to foreknowledge of alternate timelines, but of the implicit knowledge one has from observing and engaging with any narrative. As an aside, it is pertinent to clarify that although the player acts and exists in the game as the Freyr is a distinct and unique entity from the player itself. Now, consider for a moment how an average person consumes any kind of media. Tropes, narrative beats, and dramaturgical elements are so well known that you can predict how a story will go based on just a handful of narrative facets. You can predict how a story will play out because a narrative cannot extend beyond the confines of what can reasonably take place in it. For example, imagine a scenario in which character A must protect and rescue character B. This is a standard setup, one that's been done countless times. Based on the various iterations of this setup that many of us have experienced, we can reasonably guess how the story will play out. Either character A successfully rescues character B, or character A fails to save character B, or character A succeeds in saving character B but at the cost of their own life, or the scenario ends in tragedy, with neither character making it out alive. A whole host of stories may have crossed your mind as I laid out these scenarios. It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? This awareness of the narrative flow, of the individual aspects that comprise it, and the knowledge of how it will likely end. It's akin to something like clairvoyance. Oh, well, now I'm starting to sound like Iris. Anyway, as the Freyr, you have knowledge of certain truths of the story that the characters cannot reasonably be aware of. This is actively noted by the characters themselves. Simultaneously, the player has preconceived assumptions that color the player's perception of the narrative. Despite the narrative actually lying to us to maintain the illusion of its own constitution, we still choose to remain immersed. The implicit understanding that the narrative, that the game, is not real is repeatedly challenged by the game itself. The story insists on breaking immersion. Conversely, we, the players, choose to remain immersed, despite the meta constantly infringing upon the audience's immersion. Essentially, our understanding of the narrative, including all meta aspects that temper and set our expectations, feeds into our immersion. This is not to say that any narrative that is seemingly incomprehensible is unable to immerse the audience. Surrealistic escapades like the works of David Lynch or Jacques Cocteau can immerse you just as well as any traditional narrative. However, what I'm suggesting is that immersion is often predicated on whether we are able to perceive that we are being told a story. Immersion is an active and conscious decision made by the audience. As Samuel Coleridge put it, and a semblance of truth sufficient to procure for these shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment which constitutes poetic faith. Samuel Coleridge specifically uses the term fate, which carries obvious religious connotations. Fate, one might argue, is and must be blind. It is a willful disregard of the rational objection conjured up by the mind for the sake of achieving some emotional and/or spiritual catharsis. Immersion is necessary when dealing with fiction, but irrelevant in reality. But what of the dwellers of the cave? They have faith that the light and shadows on the wall are real. Simultaneously, they are unwilling to suspend their disbelief when told of the outside world. A line is then drawn between what we know to be fiction and what we believe to be reality. For the former, immersion is an active choice that can be rescinded at any given point. Conversely, for the latter, immersion is a foregone conclusion. But then, what if what we perceive to be real is, in actuality, a fiction? This is specifically what Tokiko is suggesting when she espouses the tenets of the simulation theory and applying the theory to the game's world. The Nirvana Initiative, which is distinguished as a unique entity separate and distinct from the characters, repeatedly, either explicitly or subtly, contradicts itself. This is because the Nirvana Initiative is a game. It's a piece of fiction, nothing more. Yet, by constantly drawing attention to these inconsistencies, it presents its central theme in a diegetic and fascinating way, unlike many other similar works of fiction. At the very least, it birthed certain thoughts and notions in my mind separate from the game itself. Thoughts such as that I am actively choosing to believe the world exists beyond my own imagination, that my perception has not been orchestrated by entities beyond my scope of sight, and that I am not dwelling in a cave. But then again, is any of that true? As far as I knew and understood when playing through the Nirvana Initiative the first time, the narrative was all there existed. But then it was revealed that there exists a meta-narrative, separate and distinct from the story I had been immersed in. Suddenly, I was thrown for a loop and made to question my understanding of the narrative, of my own perception of the narrative, and how the immersion I had was a contrived effort made on my part. Suddenly, the demarcation between reality and my perception of reality became all the more clear. Now, I could be reading far too much into it. It's not as if Uchikoshi doesn't overextend his reach and do things that are, simply put, stupid. I will forever hold that dumbass 016 twist in Virtue's last reward against Uchikoshi. But this isn't outside Uchikoshi's wheelhouse either. Uchikoshi has revealed and repeatedly proven himself to be obsessed with particular ideas and concepts. Over and over, time after time, he has delved into these themes and ideas. For example, the meta playing a role in the narrative was an integral part of Ever 17, The Out of Infinity. I won't be spoiling it here, but it is worth noting that the meta has always been a prominent part of Uchikoshi's stories, as the relationship between the fiction and the observer has been an implicit aspect of Uchikoshi's works. Almost without fail, all of Uchikoshi's efforts featured the theme of the individual's perspective forming reality. This is a central element in his previous works, like the Zero Escape series. As an aside, it is quite humorous just how much repetition there is in Uchikoshi's works. I imagine many find it tedious, but I remain fascinated. Tangentially, I am reminded of this quote from the renowned filmmaker Jean Renoir, who said, "A director only makes one movie in his life, then he breaks it into pieces and makes it again." It would appear Uchikoshi does the exact same thing. Uchikoshi may operate with the same tools, but I can't deny that I always find the results entertaining and deeply stirring. But I digress. Returning to the core of this essay, let's take a step back and consider certain assumptions made on the part of the player. How many of us actively question the fact that the characters never change their clothes, or that characters who have no relevance to the narrative are faceless, or that any given character can often be found at the exact same spot doing the exact same thing? We don't consider these elements odd or out of place because we are aware that it's a game. Sure, we might make the snide comment here or there, but our immersion isn't necessarily broken beyond eliciting a flippant remark. The developers have to reduce costs, so they model a handful of characters, wearing the same clothes and animate the exact same way throughout their many interactions. None of these contrivances affect our ability to immerse ourselves in the fiction. Yet, the moment these contrivances are brought to the forefront of the narrative, or specifically when the meta bleeds into the narrative and challenges these assumptions directly, suddenly, the audience is left reeling. With all that said, let's consider Nirvana Initiative's big twist. In a scene divorced from any other, the camera is pointed at Mama. She addresses the camera directly and explains the inconsistencies and challenges our assumptions. The player had been experiencing the story out of order, thus all the oddities of the plot and all the inexplicable absurdities can be explained away. Suddenly, this breaks immersion for many players. Suddenly, this is going a step too far. Why is that? Some fans have pointed out how this particular twist had been done in a more organic way in one of Uchikoshi's other works, that the meta aspect had been woven into the narrative in a seamless way. And initially, I agreed with that assessment. But looking back, I've reached the conclusion that Uchikoshi didn't aim for seamlessness, evident by the fact that a tear in the seam is an integral component of the Nirvana Initiative.
The intersection between the warp and weft. That's where the scene can occur.
Tokiko repeats this ad nauseum throughout the game. Conversely, Tokiko also speaks of the concept of moksha, the state of enlightenment and nirvana that reveals all truths. Tokiko asserts that moksha shall reveal the fabric of their false reality and reveal the truth. This is exceedingly ironic, as the moksha she refers to, and which she achieves in the Ryuki Diverge scenario, is equally false as anything else in the story. Although Tokiko seemingly extends beyond the confines of the narrative, she remains trapped within the meta-narrative. Why? Because it's still part of the game, of the simulation. Nirvana forms part of the illusion created by the narrative and is merely the natural conclusion of that plot thread in the meta-narrative. Now, let's read the two scenes together, the scene revealing the illusion for what it is, and the scene in which Tokiko reaches Nirvana, unaware that moksha is part of the fiction. In the former, the audience is made aware of the truth, their immersion broken. In the latter, the characters seemingly reveal the truth, their immersion sustained. There is dramatic irony in the construction of these two scenes. They are both separate from the rest of the narrative, involving characters who have displayed greater understanding of the world than others, and form an undeniable nexus between the narrative and the meta-narrative. The intentionality of these sequences highlights how the narrative and the meta-narrative operate in tandem, intersecting at the seams but never truly mingling with each other. Until, of course, they do. Why did Uchikoshi choose to write a story this obtuse and, frankly speaking, adversarial against the audience? Because of the simulation theory. The Nirvana Initiative, and by extension Uchikoshi, aim to challenge the audience's grasp of the narrative, of the audience's preconceived notions of immersion, and to assert that the true evil in the cave allegory is immersion itself. Reality, however defined by Plato and understood by any of us, is not what appears to the cave dwellers as shadows on the wall. Reality is what the man from the outside speaks of. Yet, the cave dwellers are unable to wrest themselves from the vision of shadows, too deeply immersed in the established norms of their supposed reality. Their immersion in the shadows keeps them trapped. To them, it is not a fiction. Therefore, their immersion is not a conscious choice. Rather, they are perceiving reality as they are ought to. Much like the man from the outside, the Nirvana Initiative, the plan as opposed to the game, seeks to break the character's immersion. But the Ryuki Diverge ending reveals that Tokiko, in actuality, sought to break her own immersion in the world, thus untethering her from her false reality. Yet, the meta-narrative reveals this to be another falsehood. Now, let us consider the following. The Freyr chooses to immerse themselves in the story of the Nirvana Initiative. The characters of the game are unaware of this false reality and are merely acting as naturally as they are able. Tokiko is aware of the truth and attempts to break her immersion, unaware that such actions play into the game's meta-narrative. None of these entities have actually left the cave. All the aforementioned entities exist either within the scope of the narrative or within the confines of the meta-narrative. But we, the player, as opposed to the Freyr, know what's real and what isn't. The game, no matter how immersed we get, is not real. We are aware of this. Except the same can be said by the cave dwellers. As far as they are concerned, they know for a fact that the supposed world of the outside is nothing but a fiction imagined by the man claiming to have returned from the outside. This inability to know the truth and the inability to distinguish between conscious and unconscious immersion form an integral part of the simulation theory. The game, much to the detriment of narrative cohesion, highlights this contradiction of perspectives. We know that the game is false. Tokiko knows that the game is false. Ryuki knows that the game is false. We know that the meta-narrative is false. The characters are unaware of the meta-narrative. Our immersion, or lack thereof, in the narrative may or may not bleed into our immersion in the meta-narrative. Now, with all that in mind, is the audience's lack of immersion the cause of the game's lukewarm reception? To summarize, many players found the twist regarding the meta-narrative contrived, negatively affecting their enjoyment of the mystery, and finding many of the emotional beats losing heft due to the fractured nature of the narrative as opposed to the meta-narrative. In order to evaluate these claims, let's first consider whether immersion is necessary for any fiction or specifically any narrative to have any meaning. As presented, any person engaging with fiction is aware that they are choosing to immerse themselves in a false reality. Despite this, the audience feels a plethora of emotions when engaging with such fiction: happiness, sadness, frustration, disappointment, anger, and much more. Are these emotions rendered meaningless because they emanate from a falsity? Are these emotions even real? In similar stories that deal with false realities, it is often the assertion that the real world, no matter how bleak, is preferable to the false world. Why? Because it is real. But taking a step back from larger existential conundrums, can the same be said of fiction? Are the emotions in the real world not preferable to similar yet false emotions that come about from fiction? Uchikoshi actually provides us with the answer. In the previous game in the series, The Somnium Files, Pewter states that a person watching a movie is aware that they are watching fiction, but the memories of doing so are real. This demarcation between fiction and perspective is an invaluable element in not just our understanding of the themes explored in the Nirvana Initiative, but of the dichotomy between the narrative and the meta-narrative. In the Nirvana Initiative, Tokiko, a character who unequivocally is aware of the truth of the world, is the one devoid of emotion. The previous game highlights how emotion born from fiction is nevertheless real. However, ironically, Tokiko does not seem to feel the same way, as the knowledge that the world is false and knowledge of her misdeeds strips her of all emotion. Which outlook is preferable? That, of course, is for the Freyr to decide. And the Freyr ultimately chooses to rewrite the narrative anew. The Ryuki diverge ending, brought about by the Freyr inputting the nil number, creates a new narrative, one in which the best possible ending is achieved with the least number of casualties. Komeiji is alive, Shoma is happy, Amame wasn't forced to kill, Date didn't lose his memories, nor Kizzy her legs, and the villains of the story meet their fates at the hands of justice. All is right with the world. Except the meta-narrative is still in play. The Ryuki diverge through the player's meddling as the Freyr creates two parallel yet distinct narratives, with the meta-narrative acting as a through line. With the three narratives in play, the simulation theory is proven to not be a theory at all. Tokiko was correct, at least as far as it concerns the narrative. Ryuki is now aware of the truth, yet still unaware of the meta-narrative. Despite everything working out, the player feels a sense of foreboding, an oppressive, constricting emotion. We are aware that the narrative is false, thus all the victories and positive emotions are equally false. But the feelings of wrongness are real. The player is aware of the choice made by the Freyr. The player is aware of the relationship between the narrative and the meta-narrative. This awareness influenced the Freyr, and the false reality born from that choice loops back to the player, who feels genuine emotional dissonance. And therein lies the brilliance of the Nirvana Initiative. Everything stated thus far has been for the purpose of establishing the complexity of what Uchikoshi, and by extension the game, was trying to achieve. In a diegetic manner, Uchikoshi, brilliantly in my opinion, elucidates on the simulation theory, helping the audience understand the true complexities of the theory, of Plato's allegory, and of the sense of immersion, natural or artificial, a person feels when interacting with fiction and perceived reality. The Nirvana Initiative, in as far as it concerns me at least, elucidated its own interpretation of the simulation theory and what it means in respect of fiction, our relationship with said fiction, and our perspective of reality. So then, what can be said about the game's story? Simply put, the narrative is an illusion. A conventional illusion, mind you, as it still crafts an engaging mystery, provides strong and resounding character arcs to individuals such as Amame, Ryuki, and Bibi, along with memorable and even terrifying villains in Chikara, Terror, and of course, Tokiko. But at the end of it all, it is just an illusion, but the emotions you feel when interacting with the illusion are real. Both the narrative in all its falsities and the emotions in all their genuineness factor into the meta-narrative. The meta-narrative is essentially Plato's allegory of the cave. Both Tokiko and Ryuki are the dwellers of the cave, whereas the Freyr is the purported man from the outside. The Freyr tells the truth to Tokiko and Ryuki, who seemingly accept the truth and exit the cave, thus entering the second narrative. However, the Freyr is distinct from the actual player. The former is a character as much as Date or Ryuki, thus they form part of the narrative and the meta-narrative, whereas the player exists separate from it all. The player is an observer, akin to the observer spoken of by Zero in Virtue's Last Reward. Thus, in conclusion, the Nirvana Initiative does something wholly unique and extraordinary. It crafts multiple narratives that bolster a third distinct narrative, the meta. The meta-narrative loops back into both narratives. This forms a diegetic and organic way of communicating and expounding on the game's central theme, the unreliability of our perception of reality, aka the simulation theory. In the simplest way I can put it, the game intentionally lies to you, undermines and contradicts itself, and goes out of its way to raise questions that would best left be unasked. But it does all this to raise awareness, to break immersion, not just with the game but in reality itself. The game made me question reality, of my perspective of reality, and whether my unconscious immersion in the world I occupy is actually the contrivance of some entity beyond my comprehension. These are frightening, dizzying thoughts, yet I am equally fascinated by them. And although many great thinkers have already discussed such concepts before, and many other forms of fiction have dealt with the same, I cannot think of many games that have so effectively presented such concepts in a manner that operates alongside the medium it exists in. Now, it behooves me to say that everything stated in this essay is not an excuse. I understand and sympathize with the people who felt frustrated or disappointed with this game. There are several decisions that are questionable, to say the least. The game goes out of its way to distance itself from the previous title. It keeps Date and Mizuki, the duo with the most profound and established dynamic, apart from most of the game, and the narrative is, at times, undermined by the need to feed the meta-narrative. A question is raised whether the second game in the series is the best place to discuss and elaborate on such lofty ideas, though arguably it is perhaps the best time to do so, as we are immersed in the world crafted by the first game. Additionally, did Uchikoshi have to forego a traditional narrative to illustrate these themes? Could something more palatable not be preferable? In fact, is any of what I said actually intended by Uchikoshi? He's a far more intelligent writer than I believe he gets credit for, but it is difficult to say whether the full breadth of what I've stated was actually intended by him. If not, well, that's egg on my face. However, even if Uchikoshi didn't mean any of what I've discussed in this video, even with all the problems that all of us have with the game, I love this game, warts and all. And I hope my sprawling, meandering and pretentious deliberation on the presumed themes of the Nirvana Initiative helped at least one of you to appreciate it more. If it did, well, there's nothing more I could ask for. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
Lantern these nuts!